Well, first of all, thank you, Julie, and thank whoever was responsible for inviting me here. I've driven by this building for a long time, never been inside, so thank you for the opportunity to be inside. Uh, I have a job. My job is film critic of the LA Times. People are always interested in this job. I think of it sometimes as like a job like working inside the sewers of Paris. You know, if you met someone on an airplane who worked in the sewers of Paris, you'd have a lot of questions for them. So I want to kind of reverse the way this usually goes. I want to talk for a little bit, but I really want to devote most of my time here to answering questions because I think that's what people are more interested in. Frankly, that's what I'm more interested in. And you know, not only questions about the book, just questions about film, questions about reviewing, anything that you think I might have an answer to. So I'll talk a little bit, I'll read a tiny bit from the book, and then we'll mostly do questions. You know, I've seen, I don't know how many films I've seen, but I have a good friend, a man named David Anson, who was for many years a critic at Newsweek. And David's, when he was very small and started being interested in film, he started writing down the names of every film he saw. So he has an exact total of how many films he's seen in his life. And he has seen, at this point he's closing in on 10,000 films, which is a big number. I don't think I've seen that many. But I've seen thousands and thousands of films. And most of them are really forgettable. You know, any kind of film, independent film, foreign language film, they're forgettable ones of, you know, all those genres. But I wanted to do a book really about the films that I love. I wanted to do essays about the films that made the most to me, that meant the most to me, that I really wanted to maybe take with me on a desert island if, you know, the desert island had a DVD player. These are the ones I'd want with me that I can watch over and over again. You know, when I went to college, I took a course in the New Testament. I didn't know anything about the New Testament. And they told me that the word gospel, and I hope this is true, that the word gospel means the spreading of good news, that the gospels were the spreading of the good news about Jesus. And what I want to do with, as a critic in general, but especially with this book, I want to spread the good news about the films that I really love. I want to share them with people. I've already seen them. You know, I don't get a percentage of royalties from them if people watch them. I just want people to have the same pleasure from these films that I've had. They run the gamut in time from, I think the earliest one is 1893, is the really earliest days of film, a French kind of serial drama called Fantomas, who was one of the first master criminals that we, you know, now have so taken over popular culture. This is kind of where it started. And I think the last film in the book is from 2011. It's an Israeli film called Footnote, which I really enjoyed. And they've seen them. I mean, some of these films I've seen quite recently. Some of these films really stayed with me since childhood. I saw a lot of the films. I'm from New York. I saw a lot of the films as a kid on this program called $1 Million Movie that they used to have in New York that showed old Hollywood films. It showed them every night over and over again, you know, a couple of times every night. In fact, last time I spoke, someone told me that his grandmother was a fan of $1 Million Movie because she could fall asleep while it was on and then wake up and, you know, the film would be showing a second time and she could catch up to what she'd seen. So this was a great way to see films. The film from the, whenever I talk about the book, I think about this, the first film I saw that made it into the book is a film called I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. This is what I know now as a pre-code film. This is an early sound film from, I think, 1932. It's a period in Hollywood right after sound came in and before the production code was implemented, where films were really more daring, they were a little crazier, and stuff happened that wouldn't happen in traditional Hollywood films. And I'm not going to ruin it for people who haven't seen it, but it's got an amazing ending. And it's got an ending that I can still remember sitting in front of the TV as a kid and seeing this film, and I was all by myself. My parents were, you know, didn't care, you know, they knew they were safe with me watching. I was safe watching $1 Million Movie. So I'm watching this film, and it's got this ending, this amazingly bleak ending. And I didn't know what to say. I still can remember that feeling, you know, that I said, I didn't know films could end like this. I didn't know it was legal to end a film with such a despairing ending. So that film, and now I know it's pre-code and I know all about the factors that went into that ending, but I still retain the kind of excitement and energy of seeing that film then and how much it really galvanized me. And I said, wow, this is really amazing. So each of these films has that kind of wow factor in it for me. And this is, again, an interesting experience for me. Usually part of what I do here is I'm trying to convince people to buy the book, and I don't have to really do that here because you've all been given the book. That whoever came up with that idea is a wonderful idea. But I'm still passionate about these films and still hoping that you will use this book as a way to watch and enjoy these films. Some of them will be familiar to you, some of them will not be. I think even a friend who's working on a similar book, another critic who said that he'd seen 50 of the 54 films, and I thought he would have seen everything. So everyone's going to have some things they've seen, some things they haven't seen, and I really hope that to encourage people to explore films that they might not otherwise have thought of. And I just want to read a little tiny bit from, I have an essay at the back called The 55th Film, which is kind of deciding, it talks a little bit about the process, about how I came up with, the films on the list. So I just want to read a little bit from that. I started with an initial list of more than 100 films, compiled more or less off the top of my head. A list I added to after using reference books and other compilations to prod my sometimes stubborn memory. To be fair to those who've read my previous collections, the only stricture I put on myself was not to include too many films from my earlier books, especially Never Coming to a Theater Near You, which had some of the smaller films I really liked. Rather than come up with an ironclad list of 54 before I started to write, I decided to choose the films as I wrote about them, one at a time. I selected these in no particular order. When I was ready to begin an essay, I'd look at my list, decide which title spoke to me most strongly, what film I felt like seeing at that moment in time, watch it again, and begin writing. What this system did, though I didn't realize it when I began, was to give my inventory of choices a fluid quicksilver quality, making it, in my eyes, into an ever-changing, almost living thing. While some films were always going to be there, others gained or lost status and momentum as my mood changed and the list grew in size and shape. The closer I got to finishing, the more difficult, even excruciating, choosing the final films became, because at this late stage, picking one film inevitably meant another title would be left by the wayside. By the end, I felt each of the contending films calling out to me, pleading with metaphorical tears in its eyes. Pick me, choose me, take me with you. Remember how much I've meant to you. Don't leave me behind in the darkness. Right up to the last minute, I was remembering and agonizing over new titles that I had not found room for. When Peter O'Toole died, I kicked myself for leaving Lawrence of Arabia out of the top 54. And I really do. I still feel if I had to do all over again, I'd probably kick some film out and put Lawrence of Arabia in. Feel bad I left that one out. Finally, I broke the logjam by holding auditions for the 54th film, watching half a dozen contenders before I made my choice. It was appropriately enough for a list compiled in Los Angeles, Roman Polanski and Robert Towne's Chinatown, as good a film about the city as has been made. That was my final selection. Okay, so that's kind of about how the book came about and why it's important to me. And again, one of the things about it is that the process of picking these films, especially since I did it one by one, it almost was a process of me finding out more about myself or kind of clarifying things about myself. I think films, what you like and what you don't like in film is really kind of says something about who you are on some level. And looking at these films, again, I looked at them all again before I wrote about them. I love romantic films. If I had to pick one film that was my favorite film, it's a French film called Children of Paradise from mid-1940s. It's just a wonderful romance. I also like films about moral dilemmas. I think those are very dramatic. I don't find them, tedious to do. Moral choices that people have to make can be very exciting. So in some ways, I learned I think, more about myself than I thought I would. It's almost like this book is kind of, it's like a spiritual autobiography in some ways, writing this book. So it was a lot of fun to write. I was hard carving the time out to work on it with all my other stuff, my other obligations, but I always felt happy being able to research and write about and deal with films that I really loved. So I hope you have similar experiences with it. And I think I'm ready for questions. So they said you're supposed to go to the microphone, so that is it. Okay, let me put on my seeing glasses so that I can see everyone better. Okay.
All right, well, just glancing quickly through the table of contents, it seems like it's heavily weighted toward earlier films rather than later ones. Is that because filmmaking has gotten less interesting?
Well, part of the reason is that those earlier books I've written, that especially the Never Coming to a Theater Near You, where there's a lot of more recent films that I really like. And again, I didn't want the book to be the same. I mean, I do have a weakness for older films, but I think if I had not written that previous book, that kind of imbalance wouldn't be there. But I was surprised, you know, as I said, I picked these films one at a time, and I thought about them that way. And it wasn't until I was completely finished that I was talking to my editor, and he said, you have to organize these films in some way. So I said, why don't I break them down by decades and see what happens? And I did that, and I was shocked to find that there are only 2 films from the 1970s in this book. This is supposed to be the great era of film, and I won't even say it isn't, but it just worked out that way. Chinatown and The Godfather, which are knockout films, they're the only 2 films from the 70s. I like those other films, but for whatever reason, they don't have the pull for me that the other films do. Yeah.
I was wondering, it's kind of related to what he was asking, but there in the 40s and 50s, it looks like you have a whole like the largest chunk of films. Is there something about that period or those films? Like, what is it that resonated with you more?
That's a good question. You know, I'd say I didn't really think about that till I looked at the list and I said, well, look at all these films. Why are they there? What do I like about these films? I think that the 50s are the biggest chunk. And again, that was a surprise because we think the 50s is boring, you know, Eisenhower, you know, country clubs. How could, you know, what am I doing celebrating the 50s? I finally decided that the 50s had a combination of 2 things that I really liked. Number one, this was still classical filmmaking. This is still classic Hollywood, and I like old-fashioned films. I'm not necessarily, though, I mean, I guess there's some films in here that push the envelope. I'm not necessarily looking for films that do that. So I like classic films. So this had still the virtues of the classic films, but it's post-war. Everyone came back from World War II. Things were bleaker, even though, you know, we were the nominal victors. People weren't necessarily happy. It was a traumatic time. I think the combination of that kind of unsettled bleakness, that's definitely a post-war phenomena, with the classic style of the pre-war, that's what I like about those films. I think that's what did it for me.
Great, and I have one other question.
Sure.
Now we have so many films that come out these days. What do you do when you're looking at what films you want to watch now? Do you have a process? Or?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, we live in a time, especially, I think probably only in New York and LA, but definitely New York and LA, where there, you know, a dozen films come out every week at least. Week in, week out. That's a ton of films. And, you know, it's a big, some films, you know, again, I spend a lot of time reading about films, talking about films, reading film magazines, going to festivals, talking to people who've been to festivals, trying to figure out which ones are worth it. And also I hear from publicists, you know, a lot of these films, even the tiny ones, have some kind of publicist, and they're always sending you stuff to try and convince you. But it's a judgment call on my part, what I think is worth doing. I look for I look at trailers a lot. You know, YouTube has become a friend of mine. You look at a lot of trailers online, and I can tell largely, even though I've been fooled sometimes, because the trailer makers cut what they think the most commercial trailer will be. And sometimes this commercial trailer, though it's designed to get people in the door, it may not accurately reflect the film. So sometimes a film is more interesting and less commercial than it looks like in its trailer. But mostly trailers really help me not to tell whether a film's going to be a success or anything like that, but just for me to know what I want to see. But I end up seeing more than I write about, and it's just, you know, it's just trial and error. I just hope I don't miss anything good.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
If you had to pick an Alfred Hitchcock film, which one would it be to be on your list?
Well, there is one on my list. It's
I looked through it, I didn't see it.
It's Vertigo.
Vertigo. Okay.
And I think Vertigo is a fascinating film because I just think it's a fascinating film because it's, this was Alfred Hitchcock, a very commercial director, working with two of the biggest stars of his day, working with James Stewart and Kim Novak, big commercial Hollywood film. And it's an astonishingly weird film. It's a very personal film. It's a film about the kind of odd things that obsessed him. I mean, I almost think it's as personal a film as anything that you see at Sundance, which we're looking at as personal films. Everyone does, this, as you probably know, Vertigo, when Vertigo came out, I mean, again, this is an interesting thing about the fallibility or the quirkiness of critics. When Vertigo came out, I've gone back and read the reviews. The critics said, this is average Hitchcock. Wait for the next one, basically. This is average Hitchcock. Nothing to get excited about. And as the years went on, people got more and more interested in this film. And Sight and Sound, the British film publication, every 10 years they poll critics worldwide about what the best film ever made is, which basically means your favorite film. And for decades, Citizen Kane won every 10 years. And this last time, about 2 or 3 years ago, Vertigo was named by this worldwide panel of critics as the best film ever made. And obviously it's not, nothing is the best film ever made, and I don't think Vertigo is, but it fascinates me that what happened is that its weird sensibility caught up with the times. How weird it was, I think, kind of put people off when it first came out, and now we kind of like that as a culture. The strangeness, the idiosyncrasy, the kind of obsession that we see. This resonates with modern viewers. So it's a long answer to Vertigo.
Well, this wasn't my original question, but based on what you just said. So in the world of very long Netflix queues and whatnot, which of these 54 would you say, yes, if you're going to see one, that is my favorite?
Well, it is Children of Paradise.
Children
It's a
of
French
Paradise.
film. Has anyone seen it? Show of hands.
Fair
Yeah, it's a
enough.
long film, and it's an interesting film because it was made at the end of World War II. It was made under the occupation. It was made under difficult circumstances. Some of the below-the-line people were Jewish, and they worked from hiding. You'd never know any of this as you watch the film. It's just an interesting thing to kind of have in the back of your head. It's an epic romance. It's set in Paris, and I think around the 1820s. It's about one woman, and I think it's 4 different men who become madly in love with her, and how that all works out. It's just a marvelous film, and I could really watch that again and again.
Okay.
And the other one, there's another French film, another French romance that is, I have watched again and again because it's shorter, and it's obviously in the book. It's called The Earrings of Madame De, D-E ... It's by a French director, actually an Austrian director, but it's a French film named Max Ophuls. And he was a master of the moving camera. Films, put on, in those days they weren't handheld, they were put on tracks. And it just, there's some shots that are just completely intoxicating that I could watch forever. So I'd put those 2 at the top of the list.
Wonderful. Look forward to it. Let me ask you a practical question. Then.
Okay.
If we're using this as a roadmap for things to see over the next year or so, would you recommend seeing the movie before? You don't give away the ending to
I don't give
Am a
away the
Fugitive
ending.
from a Chain Gang, for
Yeah.
instance.
Yeah.
But do you have any recommendation of, read it first and then watch it to give context, or watch and then?
That's a
What-
good
what do you think?
question. I mean, people do, with my reviews, people do it both ways.
Sure.
Even though I'm careful in my reviews not to give away, I give away as little of the plot as possible. But still, some people want to read them afterwards, which is fine with me. I think I wrote them to encourage people to see the film, so maybe reading them will make you more. I think in some ways you should read them first and see which ones ring a bell with you, and which ones say, boy, this one sounds like something I want to see.
Sure.
But you could read it afterwards. I mean, if you have enough faith in me to see it without reading the essay, then, go with God.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks.
This may or may not relate to the book, but I was wondering if there's a film in the book or a film in general that you really liked, but a lot of other critics didn't like? Have you had
Yeah,
any
I mean, I
examples?
think, I think one that I think of is one that, I mean, a lot of critics, not a lot, but there are a lot of lists of films that people love. there's a kind of a really kind of, in some ways, a very standard studio movie, again, a romance, that is not on a lot of people's lists. It's a film called Random Harvest. It was taken from a big bestseller. It stars Greer Garson, and it has to do with amnesia, but it's got such a complicated plot. Even if I wanted to give away the plot, there's no time. There's so many things that happen in it. And it's just kind of, it kind of amazed me when I saw it because the plot was so crazy. And because so much stuff happened, and because so much good acting and craft went into this kind of really astonishingly far-fetched story, and a very romantic story. So that's the one I think that most people would say, what's that doing there?
Hi. This is easier. Do you ever feel kind of like your hands are tied by your chosen form? Like in the sense of, I assume that your criticism, your analysis is based on kind of a analysis of the whole film, and then you have to do this thing where you don't tell anybody what informed what you thought, because you have to. It's like a secret literary analysis. You're not allowed to tell people why it did this. You just have to tell them that it did this. Or do you think that it's kind of freeing to not have to tell people, this is why the filmmaker did,
Well, but what I do is speculate on why. I do actually speculate on why. I mean, there's no way to know why without, I mean, it's possible the filmmaker, him or herself, doesn't even know why they make the choices they do. But again, I try and speculate as to why my job, my goal when I go in there, I look at the film and I really want to say, is it effective? If it's a comedy, am I laughing? If it's a documentary, am I really involved? If it's a thriller, am I really nervous and at the edge of my seat? And that's my first line of thought. And then the second line of thought is I do try and figure out, why is this happening? Why am I feeling the way the film wants me to feel, or why am I not feeling the way the film wants me to feel? So I do try and go into that. But still, I mean, it is, but I do try, especially because I've been doing it so long, I feel like if there is a film where I can turn it into an essay, or where I can go further with things, or look at aspects of the film, I try and do that. I don't want to be writing the same review day after day, week after week, so I do look for ways to make it different.
Sorry, I have two questions. My first one, I guess, relates to the context of appreciation. How does, say, watching a film in a movie theater versus in, your personal home or in a screening studio, how does that context impact the way in which you appreciate or reappreciate films as you did in the book?
I'm a big believer in the theatrical experience. Not so, on this big screen. I mean, even my screen at home, I have a projector screen at home. It's like a 100-inch screen. It's quite a big screen for a whole, I want to be kind of drawn into the image. I like being overpowered by the image. I mean, I don't want to watch things small. I don't enjoy watching things on my computer. So I believe that in that sense, the size of the screen and being in a room where you can really feel the size of the screen is very important. It doesn't. It turns out that it doesn't really matter to me how big and the studios often have this feeling that they want you surrounded by people who they think will like the film. They want to surround you with advocates of the film, and so that you will like it. And it's a fine theory, but I just don't think it really works. I mean, I find that it doesn't matter if the audience likes the film or not. I have my own relationship to the film. I will like it or not like it. The one thing that makes a difference is having a big screen. I mean, if I see it on a small screen, I'm not going to be happy. I'm not going to get drawn in. I want to be drawn in. That's the whole thing I love about film, is that they draw you in. And so the big screen is essential for me. Audience, recruited audience, ordinary people, other critics, doesn't really matter to me. And you said you had another question?
Yeah, my second question relates to I guess your personal interest in evaluating long-form stories. I guess in the context of, say, television, where you have these sort of multi-season productions that carry a lot of filmic qualities.
Yeah,
And then you also have these sort of longer form films that either fit within the context of a larger trilogy or say a director's sort of oeuvre. But
Yeah.
what's your comment on the long form?
Yeah, I mean, they're fascinating. I mean, again, if they're well done, longer films, and that by extension, these, multi-season TV series, they really draw you in. They can make characters more complex. I think that, it's exciting what's being done on television. I mean, I think the great thing about TV is that, a lot of the stuff that people enjoy are a function of the fact that television has not abandoned the adult audience. And the movies, by and large, even though they don't want to admit it, the movies have abandoned the adult audience. It just doesn't fit with their business model. But with cable, it does fit with their business model, and so they're doing this stuff, and it's fascinating. I don't have time to see it as much as I'd like to. I watch this stuff. I was binging on things before it was a word. I would go on vacation with entire seasons of programs and just watch for hours and hours. So I appreciate what they're doing, and it's related to film, but it's not exactly the same thing. There's one film here that I really like that's quite long. I think the longest film in the book is an Italian film that was actually made for Italian TV. It's called The Best of Youth. And I think in total it's about 6 hours long, if my memory serves. And it's just totally involving. It's about the 60s and two brothers, and you get incredibly involved in the story. So I think the long form, they can do things that shorter films can't do, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, so I also have a couple questions. First, you talked about how introspective it was as the process of picking these movies, and that made me wonder, as a reviewer, how do you balance, or what side do you choose between sort of, as when you write your review, exposing yourself and the reaction you had to the movie versus putting yourself in the shoes of your readers and trying to guess how they'll react?
I think you really can't do, though, I think of the two things that you've mentioned, you can only do one thing. You can only be yourself. I think criticism is an intensely personal job, that it comes, what you like and what you dislike comes a lot out of, the kind of person you are, what's important to you, just the kind of things you personally like. I can't, if someone said to me, put yourself in the shoes of all the readers, I wouldn't know where to begin. I think I just embrace the fact that this is personal, that there's not, I write for myself, for people like me, for people who I think are intelligent and interested. There's no way for me to write kind of for an audience that isn't me. Mm-hmm. I don't think I could do it.
My other question was, you talked about how one of the things you sort of measure as you watch a movie is how well the movie is at being what it is, like in a comedy making you laugh and in a thriller thrilling and so on. I mean, you also talked about how trailers can kind of be a little bit deceiving because they focus on the commercial parts, or what would be commercially successful. And so I was wondering if there's a film that particularly delighted you in a way that you didn't expect going in. Maybe something you thought was a comedy that thrilled you, or vice versa.
That's a good question. Good films, there's a film that I saw years ago called, not Sunset Boulevard, but a film called Hollywood Boulevard. It was a Roger Corman film made by a man named Alan Arkush. It was about a mythical studio in Hollywood called Miracle Pictures. And their motto was, if it's a good picture, it's a miracle. And sometimes I feel that way. I mean, really, the films that really work the best, they do all astonish you. I mean, it's so hard to make a really good film. I think one that I think of that was a real surprise to me, there was, at Cannes, there was one night I remember just going into a screening, I was really tired and irritable, and the film was about childhood. And I'm not necessarily a big fan of films about childhood. And I thought, oh boy, I'm sorry I'm here. And the film came on, and it just absolutely took me away. It transported me. It's in fact in the book. It's a French-Canadian film called Liolo, which is one of the more obscure films in the book. So yeah, I mean, it's wonderful to be excited. I mean, that's why I do this, is to have those moments to walk in and say, oh my God, this is so exciting. And again, I write to try and get more people to have that experience.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll try a slightly different tack on this. Do you have any films that you felt were kind of had a lot of potential but just missed it, that if they had just done things a little bit differently, they could have been great films but sort of missed the mark?
Yeah, I feel that all the time, actually. I mean, those films obviously are not in the book because the ones that are there are the ones that I feel really did live up to it. But I mean, I think, one of the things about being a critic is that people want you, people come up to me all the time and talk to me about films, or when I hear from them about my reviews. People want you to either love a film or hate a film. They want it to be, I guess maybe the word is binary that way. They want you to either say, I love this film, you have to go see it, or this is the world's worst film, stay away under all costs. A lot of films fit in the middle. They are the kind of films that you describe, that there are good elements to them, but they just haven't gone quite far enough, or some things don't quite gel. And it's hard to write about those films, and I think in some ways it's frustrating to readers because they have to figure out, well, should I see it? And I try and give help in that thing. I mean, there's a film that came out, I think, a week or so ago called The Drop, which I thought had a lot of really good elements in it, especially James Gandolfini. It was his final role. But it's a film set in Brooklyn with a lot of European, really, really good European actors putting on Brooklyn accents. And I'm from Brooklyn, and I was sensitive to that. So I thought it just kind of was a near miss. There's a lot of near misses. I mean, they're better than the terrible films, but I just wish they were all better.
Hi. First question, when I first went to a film festival many years ago, I was so enthusiastic, I went through the program and circled all the things that I'm going to see. I was like talking about binging. And then I realized that after seeing 2 films in a row, the third one, I would just sit there and I'd go completely over my head. And I just kind of wondering, what's the highest frequency that you can watch? That's kind of let's leave it at that.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's a very interesting question. In fact, I mean, film festivals, for the reasons you state, are really bad places to see films because you get overload. You end up, I mean, for professional reasons, when I go to, I think at this point I go to Sundance and I go to Cannes, and I look in on multiple films a day. 2, 3, 4 films a day, sometimes 5. I don't see them all the way through necessarily. I can't, past 1 or 2 films, anything I see at a festival I have to see again before I write about it at length, just for the reason you're talking about. You get kind of overload. You can't really, at least for me, I can't take them in on the level of focus and intensity I need to write about them if it's the 3rd or 4th film of the day. So one of the frustrations of festivals is anything I see there, if I have to write a full-scale review later, I'm going to have to see it all over again. It's just, I have exactly the same experience you do. I mean, your mind just won't take them in the way they took in the first one or the second one.
Unlike TV series, which I did binge on, and that actually goes very well because it's one world. You don't have to take on all these different worlds.
Yeah, here you've got to totally reboot your head, or somewhere else, totally different kind of film, and you just get tired.
Thanks.
Hi. So when you want to see, let's say that, a movie's coming up that you're really excited to see. It's either by a director who you love or about a subject matter that you like. And, as interested as you are in it, you can tell it kind of missed the mark. How do you write a fair review and criticism of that?
Well, those are sad moments, because you want, especially if you're excited by the notion, you just have to be, I always am thinking, even though maybe something I said earlier will sound the difference, I'm always thinking about, I write for readers. People, I have to be honest. That's all I have. People trust me to be honest. They may disagree with me, but I have to be telling the truth as far as I can see it. And even though it's very sad to have to write, a disappointed review about something I was looking forward to, I have to do it. If I have, one of the, as I said, people come up to me all the time and ask me what I think about films. And sometimes people come up to me, my nightmare is when someone comes up to me, and it happens, and they say, I went to, fill in the blank. I went to this film just because you liked it, and I hated it. And then they look at me and they say, did you really like that film? And I want to be able to say yes. I don't want to be thinking, you know, I cut it a break because I like the director, or I cut it a break because I like the subject matter. I want to be able to say, no, I really liked it. So I worry about that, but I just have to be as honest as I can, otherwise there's no point in doing this.
Thank you.
Okay.
I was curious how important pleasure or entertainment is in your reception or your appreciation of a film. Like how much are you can you accommodate difficulty in watching a film? There's some certain critics who are almost connoisseurs of difficulty, right? and you think when you watch something like Barry Lyndon or maybe like a long form Terrence Malick film or something where you could actually potentially be bored for stretches at the film, but you really appreciate the craft of it. How important is that? I read some critics and it's all about the pleasure and the excitement of watching, and they don't like as much these sort of difficult stretches. But how much do you appreciate it at the level of craft versus personal pleasure?
That's an interesting question. I think they all kind of meld together on some level. I have to find something to appreciate if I'm going to appreciate it.
Right.
I can appreciate something that doesn't sound likable or something that can be difficult. I saw a film a few weeks ago called Starred Up. It's a British film. It's an exceptionally violent film, which is usually something I don't like. And so, I kind of winced at the violent parts of it, but the filmmaking was so exciting and the storytelling was so good and the acting was so good that I said, I really like this film. So, pleasure is kind of a malleable quality. Sometimes you find yourself liking things because of the skill involved that you would not think you would like.
Yeah.
Sometimes films that sound boring or that you even think you'd be bored by end up being fascinating. But I guess it all comes back to pleasure for me, I think, but that doesn't just mean that things are easy and happy. Sometimes very difficult films can be a pleasurable experience if the person making them is really gifted and you really get on that wavelength. Does that make sense?
No, I think it does. On the other hand, can you think of any films that are like just big sprawling messes?
There's a lot of big sprawling.
No, that are at the at the level of craft, are not like the best films ever made, but you love them for that incoherence or that uniqueness.
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably, sometimes films just take you away. I really enjoyed. Again, it's a film I had written about 6 months ago. I wrote a review of Captain America, where I wrote about Marvel fatigue. I said, I've just seen enough Marvel movies. They're all the same. They're all kind of, machine made, and I've had it. And the next Marvel film I had to look at was Guardians of the Galaxy, which is this kind of big, messy film, and a lot of critics have written that it doesn't really make sense. But I enjoyed it. It had a spirit and a kind of an energy that really captivated me. So each film is a unique experience. Again, that goes back to why I can't see more than two or three on the same day. You want to be taken where the film wants to take you. You want to be open and receptive to what it's doing. And if it's a mess, but an enjoyable mess, I'm okay with that.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay.
Since it worked with our last question, I'll share another experience. I had the extraordinary luck of watching Heavenly Creatures without knowing anything about it, what it was about. So I had this this will probably make at the top of my list very easily, just because there was this moment in the film that there's this realization, oh my God, they're serious. This is not a fantasy. They're actually going to kill the mother.
Yeah.
Which I'm sorry.
Don't give away the,
So sorry.
See, you don't want to be giving, people don't like it.
I'm not saying if they did or didn't. I'm just saying that they were going to. Maybe 5 years or 6 years after I saw it in a movie theater, I saw that it was coming on TV, and I said, great, I was going to watch it. And it turns out that I remembered the ending all wrong.
Huh.
I somehow managed to change my memory as I was kind of going over it and thinking about it over and over, just wondering if you had that experience with a movie that you haven't seen in a long time.
Well, I mean, I did have with this book, as I said, I didn't want to put anything in here that I didn't really still like. So I looked at everything again. And there was, not that I remembered them differently, but sometimes there were some films that I had loved when they came out that I thought would be in the book that didn't make it because I saw them again and I said, I just don't like them as a wonderful, what I used to think was a wonderful Cuban film. I still enjoyed it a lot, but it wasn't one of my favorites, a film called Lucia, a very long 3-part Cuban film that I really liked, but it wasn't as strong as I remembered it. It wasn't strong enough to make the top 54. So sometimes you do remember. Again, this is all very personal. You're a different person years later sometimes. Everything changes.
My question is about old movies. At this point of your career, do you still discover old movies new to you? Like for me, I like old movies, but this summer I was on a flight British Airways, and I just played on their entertainment system. I saw the movie Summertime from the 1950s with Katharine Hepburn in it, and I really enjoyed it. But my way used to trying to find some old movies is like this book and lists, but I've never remember seeing that movie on any of the lists. So what else can I do to kind of find this kind of old movies? Because there's no trailers showing when I go to
No, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I mean, my worry is not having the time to see all the films that I haven't seen. Not that I'm going to run out of ones to see. They're always old films. Now, I'm not talking about new films. I'm talking about the old films. There's a lot of, Hollywood used to put out way more films than they do now. I think in 1939, which is considered to be the top year in the golden age of Hollywood, I was just looking at something, and I think they said I can't remember how many, but it may be as many as 600 films came out in that year. There were a lot of studios, and there were these Poverty Row studios that also turned out films. So there's a ton of stuff out there to be discovered. I mean, like I said, this book, not only are there 54 films, there's a second 54, and there's also, each film has a notation at the end of what to watch next. So if you like one of the films in there and you want to see something else like it. I mean, there are lists online. I mean, also you can look at what companies like Criterion, which is probably the gold standard of re-releasing stuff, they're always finding new, exciting directors. Actually, I just got an email from them. They're having and also there's a lot of directors overseas that you can see their old films. They're putting out I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there's a Japanese director from the 50s that I'd never heard of that they're putting out a box set of 5 of his films, so that's very exciting. There's all kinds of stuff out there. I think you just have to do research online, I think is probably the best way. But you're not going to run out. There's a ton of stuff out there.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'm curious. There are particular movies that you've reviewed where you've gotten a lot of like flack or blowback. Do you have any stories about that?
Well, there's one that comes immediately to mind. I wrote several times, more than once. I was not a fan of Titanic, and I wrote several negative pieces about it. And James Cameron wrote a long, open letter to the Times, which the Times published, demanding that I be fired. This really happened, And so that was probably the strongest blowback I've ever had. But but even before that, I mean, that was still the film that I've gotten the most mail about, both pro and con, people who loved the film and people who didn't love the film. So, I mean, and with email, I get more stuff than ever, So it happens.
Well, for what it's worth, I was glad you wrote the critical review of that film.
Well, good. Thank you.
So how do you normalize for kind of buzz or hype? I mean, I know, for instance, like you said you didn't write your review of Boyhood initially because there was so much love and you weren't as blown away by it by everybody else. And for instance, for me, like I saw both Gravity and And Guardians of the Galaxy, what I consider to be like peak buzz, but like a couple weeks after they came out, everyone's saying how amazing they were, and I was just kind of, I went in expecting a miracle, and I was like, okay, it was a good movie, whatever. Like, so how do you, as a critic, try to neutralize the effect of that kind of?
No, that's a good question. I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, what I try and do is avoid that stuff as much as possible. I don't talk to people. I don't read stuff. I leave rooms when conversations are going on. You know, I want to go into the film as cold as possible. I don't want to feel that, I'm reacting to the hype. I want to react to the film. So I try and avoid knowing about the hype as much as I can. And also sometimes studios are sensitive to that, and they will show the film to me early in the, even if it's at a festival, sometimes I can see a film here in LA so that I can have an honest experience and not be reacting to what everyone said. But with these big films, it is a problem, and the only way I can do it is to try. I mean, I had, publicists are always wanting to talk to you about films and tell you about their films, and I don't want to, I just want to see the film. And just someone wanted to tell me about, it wasn't even her film, it was another film that she'd really liked, and I remember like I was in a garage trying to get to my car, and I ran away from her. I just said, I don't want to hear it. But I think what you're talking about for me is a real factor, and I really try to know as little as possible about a film going in. And that can be difficult, but that's really my goal.
So the only thing I really know about reviews is that they come out on Fridays or maybe a little bit earlier. How long does it take you to write a review? What is the churn, or is there a deadline?
Oh yes, there's always a deadline. For sure there's a deadline. My reviews, they do come out on Friday. Again, the presence of the online world has changed things somewhat because we have a lot of readers online, and they get the review earlier. My understanding is that the reviews go up online sometime on Thursday. So they need it from me, they want it from me on Wednesday. And how long it takes is partly a function of how much time the movie itself gives me. In other words, sometimes the studios are nervous about a film and they won't show it to you until the last minute. Sometimes if a review is due Wednesday, I won't see it till Tuesday night. Sometimes I'll see it Wednesday morning. I mean, this is rare. Sometimes they won't show it at all, So, but if a film is good and they show it to me with plenty of time, I mean, I like to have a certain amount of time, I don't know, ideally at least a week, to just let it sit in my mind. This is a week when I don't do anything, when I'm just walking around living my life. And I'm thinking about the film, at odd random moments it'll pop into my mind and I'll get an idea about what I'm thinking. So after it does that for about a week, then I sit down, and I usually do it in a day, 2 days, depending on the film, what else is going on. I type up my notes. I take a lot of notes. Critics don't always take notes. Some of my friends who are critics write almost nothing down, and they had been able to retain it, but I have to take notes. So I take a lot of notes. I type them up, which gives me an idea of where my thoughts are going, because when I see overall what I've been saying, I just take notes moment to moment. Then when I type them up, I get a sense of what I'm thinking. And then I sit down with the notes and I put together the review. And like I say, the whole process takes 1 to 2 days per film.
And then one other thing is, do you have time to watch good television or YouTube videos? Or
Not as much. Well, sometimes when I'm trying to waste time, I'll see what's on YouTube. Writers are always wanting to waste time. And again, with the television, I don't have the time. That's why, as I said, I binge. I take the stuff on vacation with me. I have too heavy a screening schedule to really be able to watch something on a regular basis. So if something my friends tell me is good, I will get the whole season on DVD and take it with me on vacation. And there is great stuff on television, I just don't have the time to watch it.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, one more, last question. Okay.
Okay, this is actually more of a little bit of a technical question, but some of the films that are recommended on these lists are a little bit obscure, and do you have any tips on how or where to find them?
I think, in my book, I think just about everything is available, even though they sound obscure, and they are obscure, they're basically all there. I think the only thing that really isn't there in any findable form, believe it or not, is a 1920 silent short by a man named Max Davidson that I have the copy I have is a European DVD that won't play on American. I've got a multi-region DVD player, but everything else in the book is available, certainly for DVD rental or purchase, and probably for download. There's more out there than you think. They're there. Okay?
Let's all thank Kenneth Turan for joining us today.
Thank you.